Washington, D.C.
As you know, we're locked and loaded. We're locked and loaded and ready to go, but we're talking to them. So I think while we're talking, we'll see what comes of it.
Tonight, no end in sight. The U.S. and Iran exchange another round of strikes as President Trump weighs a potential major offensive to attempt and force a peace deal after 2 weeks of hostilities, with Israel a key player in both the war and any diplomatic off-ramp. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet with Trump here in Washington on Tuesday. And rebuilding the wall, President Trump's revamped tariff strategy begins to take shape 5 months after the Supreme Court struck down his original measures. The U.S. will now impose duties ranging from 10 to 12.5% on imports from dozens of countries using a different provision of trade law. And recess begins. The House heads home for a weeks-long August recess while the president urges the Senate to move quickly on a sweeping budget plan before it follows suit. We'll discuss the state of Congress with Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi later this hour. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee Lyons has the night off. We begin with President Trump considering a possible massive attack, in his words, on Iran, saying the U.S. military is locked and loaded as he weighs his options. Trump's threat coming as CENTCOM carries out another night of strikes, 13 straight, while the president tells Axios he does not believe Iran was ready to make a deal just yet, saying, quote, they haven't received enough pain yet, unquote. Joining us now from the White House North Lawn is Bloomberg's Jeff Mason, who was just in the Oval Office with President Trump. Did he signal his next move, Jeff?
Thanks, Joe. Well, what he signaled was that he hadn't quite made up his mind yet. He's certainly indicating that the U.S. is ready for a massive attack or additional attacks, but he also told me that he and his administration advisors and officials are in talks with Iran right now, which was quite interesting. Take a listen to that exchange.
Have you made a decision about the major strikes that you were referring to? Okay. Should we expect to see major strikes?
Look, we're talking to them right now. I think they're getting more and more serious as the days go by, for maybe the obvious reason. We're locked and loaded. We're locked and loaded and ready to go, but we're talking to them. So I think while we're talking, we'll see what comes of it.
And
I believe, Jeff, they're very serious. Okay. They should be.
So a couple of things to take out of that. Number one, locked and loaded, as you played before and we just heard again. So the U.S. is ready, but also indicating that he may hold off at the moment while talks continue. I also asked him who was involved in those talks, and he indicated, again, that some of the same cast of characters were, including Vice President J.D. Vance, Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, his special envoy. So we haven't gotten a whole lot of detail about that, but the fact that he suggested the two sides are now talking again, and that is having an impact on his decision whether or not to do these massive strikes, was certainly interesting to hear.
Really interesting, Jeff. We appreciate you bringing that exchange to us. We've got tariff news today. Of course, many saw it coming as the expiration of temporary tariffs was set for today following the Supreme Court ruling. Now the U.S. will collect duties of between 10 and 12.5% from some 60 economies, including some pretty close allies here. And it's all based on this Section 301 implying forced labor practices. And, Jeff, based on what the president's posting today, there might be more where these came from.
Absolutely. The president has not given up on using tariffs as his main cudgel, his main weapon for foreign policy and over things that he doesn't like from our allies and U.S. enemies alike. And it's certainly done it again today. It was a big blow for the United States, well, I should say for President Trump, when the Supreme Court struck down his initial tariff authority that he was using earlier in his term. Now he's got a new one. This was a workaround. It's upsetting some allies, but President Trump is certainly pleased by it. And yes, I think you're right that there are more to come.
All right, Jeff. Thanks for being there. Good luck at the dinner later on. Jeff Mason live on the North Lawn of the White House. With us now is Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. A lot of questions for you, and I'll start with the matter involving Iran. As the president says, we are locked and loaded, and he appears to be on the precipice of an important decision here. about whether or not to go back to all-out war. In fact, even heavier strikes, he said, than we have seen so far in the initial stages of Operation Epic Fury, possibly including bridges and power plants. Is that what's next?
I don't know. I hope not. I think it would be Operation Epic Chaos at that point, because remember, just as we hold certain Iranian assets, such as power plants, at risk, they hold various U.S. Interests at risk as well. Not to mention those of our friends and partners and allies in the region. And so I think escalation would be absolutely the wrong direction to go. Instead, we should go back to the bargaining table. I've been part of various classified briefings, including an extensive one yesterday in the Intelligence Committee. There is no way at all to resolve this situation militarily, not any. We have to do it through negotiation. We have to end this illegal war, and we have to bring our friends, partners, and allies to the table with Iran to end this once and for all.
Well, you guys are out of town now. Of course, realize the Senate will be here for a minute next week. They'll be headed to their August recess. There's money to raise. There are campaigns to run for re-election. Is the president going to comport this war while you're out of town without the oversight of Congress?
I don't know. I think that we have to continue to raise a voice on this particular issue and get the public educated and informed, and putting pressure on him as well as the White House. I do think that he is responsive to it. I see that the numbers of people in the MAGA base who disapprove of his handling of this war is increasing steadily, and I think that will make a difference as well. In essence, I think that public pressure is what we need to focus on right now to get changes in this White House.
I was really struck by a post the president made today on Truth Social. I suspect you've seen it as someone who sits on the China Select Committee and is the former ranking member. Maybe you have a sense of what he's referring to. It's a pretty long post. He says, President Xi told me he would not under any circumstances give or sell weapons to the Islamic Republic of Iran. He goes on to say, same for Vladimir Putin, understands that he would not sell weapons to Iran. And he says, I don't sell weapons to Ukraine, but to NATO countries. He's not, I think, threatening anything here, but raising this as a point of fact. Can you tell us, Congressman, is China giving weapons to Iran?
I haven't seen evidence of direct transfers, but we know that the Chinese, the Russians, even the North Koreans and others have interests here and are aiding the Iranians in different ways. There's published reports, of course, about the Russians sharing intelligence with regard to targeting. We know that the Shahed drone, which the Iranians manufactured, is basically under license to the Russians now, and the Russians are manufacturing it. I would not be surprised to see some of those back in Iran. And so we're kind of in the situation where the Iranians are able to continue building their weaponry, even at the same time they're expending it. And so I'm concerned that they have the capacity to continue with this conflict for much longer than anticipated at the start of this conflict.
Well, you know, the president's been saying a lot about China. I'm sure you saw his primetime address to the nation just last week, in which he suggested that China had interfered with and attempted to influence the outcome of not just the 2020, but the 2018 elections, setting us up for one doozy of a meeting when President Xi comes here in September. If you haven't seen evidence of China giving weapons to Iran, have you seen evidence of China interfering in United States elections?
No, and this is kind of something that not even he said during his speech the other night, that the Chinese interfered either in the casting of ballots or the tabulation of ballots. And therefore, the outcome was what we've always known it to be, which is that Joe Biden won the presidential election in 2020. And so you have to ask the question, why is he bringing this up? It appears to be a pretext to interfere in the upcoming elections in November in different heavy-handed ways. And so, again, we in Congress, just as we have repeatedly passed the War Powers Act to try to block further hostilities with regard to Iran, I think we have to take action with regard to the election, whether it's preventing DHS from leveraging its anti-terrorism funds to try to get states to go its way in terms of election procedures, or the USPS being instructed not to deliver mail-in ballots to any states that refuse to hand over their voter registration rolls to the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, we've been talking a lot about China with you, of course, here on Bloomberg, and the prospect of export controls on our technology, and, of course, the interference that we've seen in many cases in Chinese technology here. We had another DeepSeek moment, a moonshot this time, with another AI model that some believe was based on intellectual property right here in the United States. I'm curious your thoughts on the AI race between our two countries, if you think, in fact, China has moved ahead, and if our frontier models, Congressman, should be open source to keep up.
I don't think that they've moved ahead. However, they are closing the gap. And so whereas, you know, previously we may have been years ahead, now I think a lot of experts think that we are months ahead in terms of where the frontier labs are relative to the Chinese models. That to me means at least three things we have to do. One, we absolutely have to further restrict the export of those highest end semiconductor chips. The fact that the Trump administration is considering sending these types of chips to China is ridiculous, especially in light of what we know about the advances of their AI models and the use of those AI models, by the way, for their military programs and for perpetration of human rights abuses. The second thing is we've got to do whatever we can here to stop shooting ourselves in the foot with regard to our best talent in AI. You know, our immigration crackdowns are further pushing away the very talent that we need to win the AI race. And then third and finally, yes, I do think that some of these, this distillation, what they call distillation, or getting Anthropic and OpenAI and other models here to teach the Chinese models how to enhance their capabilities is probably a gray zone that, in my opinion, starts to look like mass industrial scale intellectual property theft. And so we've probably got to regulate that as well. I guess the last thing I would just say is we're also hobbling ourselves through a political agenda where, for instance, Anthropic gets labeled as a national security risk by the Department of War, and that hurts our ability to use Anthropic and our highest end large language models to enhance our own security.
I want to ask you about an op-ed that I saw you wrote in Chicago Tribune. The headline is "The Iran Gas Tax is going to hit American families, but we can change the future." We've got a national average, Congressman, today, $4.10. In your state of Illinois, $4.26. You're above the national average. And I'm wondering your thoughts, if you can expand on what you wrote here, because you believe the answer is alternative energy, beginning with solar. But, Congressman, in this Congress?
Well, look, I think that one of the first things that the Trump administration did is it axed something like 200 to 300 renewable energy projects through the DOE. Once you start doing that, you basically start to give the Iranians more leverage at the bargaining table, because then their chokehold on our energy supplies, especially through the Strait of Hormuz, become even more salient. And so we've got to remove that leverage, Joe. We have to do everything we can to wean ourselves off that fossil fuel. So, for instance, that means embracing EV technology. It means making sure that renewable energies, whether it's solar or wind or other types of renewables, are able to flourish here. It may not change the price of gasoline today, but it sends a strong message that we are moving away from these fossil fuels. And I think it also signals to the market a shift that would translate into some reduction in the price of oil and gasoline over time here.
Need to know in our remaining moment your thoughts on what happened today in the DNC Rules and Bylaws meeting. Congressman, it looks like South Carolina is going to win to be the first in the nation primary state. Forget New Hampshire. We'll have another write-in campaign there for the next Democratic nominee like last time. Do you support this?
Well, look, I think that South Carolina, was chosen in part because of the horrible changes to our voting rights laws and what the Supreme Court has done in really kind of eviscerating the Voting Rights Act. And so I think putting a spotlight on the South at this moment is in part why South Carolina was chosen. And obviously, because of its diversity, it also brings an additional element to the table that didn't exist previously. Regardless, I think we're going to take back the White House, whether it starts in South Carolina, Nevada, or New Hampshire.
Well, we'll be in touch between now and then, I hope. Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, we thank you, sir. Thanks for joining and have a good weekend. Tonight, SpaceX is planning Starship's 13th flight test, the launch coming as Elon Musk has one of his worst weeks on record. Tesla dropping 18% this week, while SpaceX itself closed at $115 a share, its lowest since the company's historic IPO last month. For more on how markets performed today, we were up, we were down, we moved to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda live at World Headquarters in New York. Hey, Nora.
Well, a little bit all over the place. We did see the S&P 500 ending just above flat to end a jittery week on Wall Street. We saw about 10 of 11 major sectors in the green. That led higher by real estate and materials, but where we did see some declines, that goes to tech. So you did see that weighing on the S&P 500 a little bit, but we did see it ending higher. But the NASDAQ 100, which we know tends to be very tech heavy, we did see that lower by more than 1%. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average eking out a gain of about 0.5% higher. On the week, we saw some Mag 7 earnings that began, so AI spending in focus. We also saw some activity in the oil market, of course, that due to everything ongoing in the Middle East. We saw oil topping $100 a barrel. With those tensions escalating, we're now seeing oil pulling back quite a bit. So Brent crude hanging around $98 a barrel and WTI at about $89 a barrel. And a bit of activity in the bond market with bonds rising and yields falling across the curve.
Got a big headline late in the day. Just want to ask you about quickly, Nora. Paramount and Warner Brothers are pressing pause on their deal. What's going on here?
So we did see that the companies are deciding to press pause on that deal. Now, we know that this is a $110 billion merger, one of the largest media deals in history. But this will be expensive for Paramount, which will owe about $7 million per day to Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders beginning October 1st until the deal is actually closed. And it's a bit of a walkaway risk there as well. So if the deal were to fall apart after the deadline, Paramount would be responsible for a $7 billion termination fee.
All right, Nora, I appreciate it. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda on the case in New York. Have a great weekend. Coming up, the president's promising, or at least threatening, an attack, a massive one, on the Iranian regime. But when? The global ripple effect the war is having, and a lot more. When we talk with Jen Gavito, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Well, I don't know that they're enabling. I mean, I will tell you that President Xi said he will not partake, and President Putin said the same thing. I think, I trust them. They've had a long-term relationship. There could be some things they do, but thus far, at least, it has not been major. I don't think they'd want to have me disappointed.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we heard from the president just a short time ago in the Oval Office there, issuing a warning to Russia and China against potentially participating in the Iran war, telling both countries not to sell weapons to Iran, as he mentioned today on Truth Social. Joining us now for the latest on this conflict is Jen Gavito, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. Jen, it's great to have you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Reporting would suggest, and we did ask the president about this today, we don't have much more light on the issue, that the president could be about to decide to go all in, a massive attack, even more so than we saw in the outset of Operation Epic Fury, knowing that we have not seen progress at the peace table? Do you expect he will?
So I think the president's instincts are still probably to avoid this if possible. And I note that he did seem to leave himself a little bit of an opening by suggesting that Iran would like to make a deal, trying, I think, maybe to set up a narrative where there are negotiations that would at least push this back. That being said, the buildup that we are seeing militarily throughout the region suggests that certainly the military is on high alert. Our embassies have warned that flight disruptions may take place again. So all the signs are there that the president is, in his own words, locked and loaded and ready to do this. I think the big question is to what end?
Okay. What do you think he's talking about when he says that? When you're talking this out at the Cohen Group, do you have a sense of what locked and loaded means? He's talked about dropping bridges, bombing power plants. Is that the next chapter?
Yeah, I mean, he said repeatedly that the next chapter would indeed be more of these civilian infrastructure targets, which, of course, when it comes to international law, would be quite an escalation, potentially in violation of that. And have enormous costs for the Iranian people themselves, who, of course, ostensibly were the reason that we got into this conflict in the first place. So I think what this represents really is the president just running out of options. I think he would like to end this war. He, of course, campaigned on no forever wars almost 6 months later. It continues to go on. And as you noted, the peace negotiations have not gotten us out of this. And so this seems like the proverbial escalate to de-escalate to his mind. And I worry, though, that there's no indication that this would actually change Iran's negotiating calculus.
That escalate to de-escalate now includes a B-1 bomber that was used for the first time just 2 nights ago since the resumption of the attacks following the fallout of the MOU. Does that give you a sense, when you see hardware moving into theater like that, of what the administration either has in mind or could be preparing for on the ground?
So the more conventional targets that we saw in March and April ultimately, as is now well known, did not fundamentally weaken the Iranian regime. It certainly brought significant economic cost to it and some pain to the people, but it did not divert the Iranian regime from its strategic objectives. And so I think what the attempt would be here would be to destabilize the regime further. There are certainly those in the administration who are still arguing that the president should try to weaken the regime, if not completely unseat it. And in order to do so, in order to fundamentally change where we are today, I think that would require, if not ground troops, and it probably would require ground troops, but it would require a real expansion geographically, the types of targets that they're hitting. And I think that's why we're seeing these troop movements, why we're seeing the movement of these assets and the deployment of new weaponry.
Just quickly, Jen, the Wall Street Journal had some fascinating reporting that Iran has far more missile capability than some might have suggested by digging out the sites that we've already bombed.
Yeah.
In our remaining 30 seconds, do we have a sense of how large this stockpile is?
Well, it was depleted certainly by the U.S. military, but as you know, they've done a tremendous job of rebuilding that very quickly. And so I suspect our intelligence agencies have some idea of how big that is. But I think what's really important here is that it cannot be fully destroyed, really. And so that gets back to this idea that there's really no outcome, no end to this conflict that isn't negotiated.
Jen, it's great to have you back. She's senior advisor with the Cohen Group. Jen Gavito, live on Bloomberg. Coming up, the president attempts to rebuild the tariff wall. We're going to talk about it with the force behind the tariff regime, Peter Navarro himself. He's next on Bloomberg. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Tonight, the president is vowing to enact new tariffs on products from the EU, as we broke earlier today on Bloomberg, promising to initiate a Section 301 investigation in retaliation to the union's billion-dollar fine on Google, along with other big firms, including Apple, Amazon, and Meta. President saying over Truth Social, quote, the European Union is at it again. And as usual, taking direct aim at great American companies after having fined Apple, Meta, Amazon, and many others. The United States of America, he writes, is not a piggy bank for Europe, nor will we allow it to be. That, of course, comes after the president announced new duties on most trading partners in the biggest move yet to rebuild the president's tariff wall, as we call it, since it was struck down by the Supreme Court. Joining us now for more is the man behind the tariffs. Peter Navarro is back with us, senior advisor to the president on trade and manufacturing. It's been a long time. Here we are again. It's good to see you
on a Friday afternoon.
Well, that's right. You know, it's funny. Everybody's an expert. It's Section 301, 122. You've taken America to school on tariffs. It's actually a household conversation this time around. And I'll ask you about this new investigation into the EU.
Yeah.
The 10% to 12.5% that are landing on 60 economies, including the EU, is based on the justification of violating forced labor laws. Can you explain that to? Does the EU have forced labor in its supply chain? Is this China? Where's it coming from?
Here's the problem. It's more than China.
Okay.
It's a lot more than China. Just think about Americans having to make stuff. Mm-hmm. And they have to compete not only against sweatshop labor, but also prison labor, forced labor.
Yeah.
China's got a lot of it in Uyghur country. But Brazil has a history of doing it. Malaysia, there's a bunch of countries that do it. So what happens is sometimes these countries directly export, but sometimes they'll send like cotton from China to Pakistan.
Okay.
And then Pakistan will use the cotton to come here. So this tariff is consistent with what Congress has said about forced labor. They've taken a very strong stand. Mm-hmm. So it's a 10% or 12.5% tariff, depending on whether you've been cooperating with our broader trade framework. But the bottom line is what we're trying to do is level the playing field for American workers and American businesses. And then this issue with Europe on our big tech companies. I mean, look, the president used the exact correct word. They treat them like piggy banks. The fines, these massive fines on Google and Meta and all of that. But there's also this issue of the digital tax, where they're trying to tax. They basically put the tax in. It's so disingenuous, Joe, because they put a tax on everybody on digital, but the only people who do it are the big American companies. So it's effectively a tax on America.
The fines are based on court cases, though, right? Were these flawed verdicts?
I'm not a big fan of courts and fairness these days. Okay. And being an American tech company in a European courtroom, I'm not sure that's going to be a just.
This is like a rounding error for these guys, though, isn't it? $1 billion.
The money. Well, I think the point here is.
I know it's the principle of it.
I think that the fact that they're doing these digital taxes, which indicates Europe's appetite for turning our companies into piggy banks, puts us more wary about other kinds of abuses, and this seems like certainly another category of abuses.
I don't know if it's possible to hear from the ambassador. We spoke with the Irish ambassador to the United States today.
Yeah.
We had a pretty good relationship with Ireland, it seems, and have for a long time. And she explained that she was they were pretty pleased when they woke up this morning, or I guess it was, late last night when they got the numbers from Jameson Greer, because there was a fear that it might be higher. Then she saw the president's post today.
Now, we're winning. We're winning.
All right, hang on. Listen to this.
When the sentiment is, I thought it was going to be higher.
That's
the 301 was an instrument that I think this administration had to choose since the court threw out the last instrument. We're not recognising that it has any implications for EU policy, but the actual framework in terms of the tariff level, as I said, was broadly positively received last night.
Geraldine Byrne-Nason then saw the post and they said, oh boy, what's this going to mean for us? Do you have a sense of what could come from this investigation?
Look, I think it's always important to remind your audience that we live in an international trade system under the World Trade Organization, which by rule allows Europe and the rest of the world to charge us systematically higher tariffs at the same time that World Trade Organization lacks what's called a dispute resolution mechanism. So when they cheat and we sue them and win, they don't basically honor the outcome of the suit. So what happens is Americans get screwed, and one number captures that unfairness. It's our massive trade deficit with Europe and China and around the world. Because if you go to the textbooks in trade, you're not supposed to have chronic balance of payments deficits. I mean, you're just not. Things are supposed to adjust. But the reason why that happens is because they cheat. So wherever they cheat, Jameson Greer is going to get them with a 301. Howard Lutnick at Commerce is going to get them with a 232. And we are rolling out other mechanisms like the 338 used for the forced labor one.
Wow. The analysis by Bloomberg Economics I found fascinating when they factored in exemptions, whether it be foodstuffs we can't get here, USMCA items or so forth. The actual real increase is pretty modest. It's 0.1% compared to where we were. The next round, though, you've got another investigation going right now on excess capacity, could actually bring the overall rate back to where it was pre-Supreme Court. Is that your view?
Well,
is that your expectation?
Let's talk about excess capacity.
Yeah.
Again, you have
that's the next round of tariffs.
You have one of the most sophisticated audiences in the world, and,
we're lucky that way.
People in Bloomberg land understand pretty clearly that excess capacity is bad for the international trading system because it puts all sorts of stresses and strains on that.
It can come in a lot of different forms.
Well,
right? Are you talking subsidies?
Well, let's take steel, for example. China has a massive amount of overcapacity
so they can
in
dump.
Steel. And so what they do is they dump into all countries of the world. And what that does is deprive nations of the world not only of being able to produce steel for jobs, but nations like to have steel industries for national security purposes for good reason. Yeah. So this excess capacity thing, again, it's an issue that the World Trade Organization has given lip service to, but nobody cooperates on it. So we are basically, the United States is leading the world, illustrating how to defend against unfair trade practices. That's all. All we want is fairness and a level playing field. And I think people understand now, after we've had some years now of the tariffs, that they don't create the inflation that everybody says it's going to happen. That didn't happen. It helps get our trade deficit down. I think it's made the international trading system more stable in the sense of countries around the world are recognizing that the way to prosperity isn't by cheating, it's by innovation and markets and things like that.
Do you know when this current investigation will be complete?
Which one are we talking about?
Into excess capacity.
No, I mean...
So this could be months down the road?
Jameson Greer is very methodical. Yeah. I can't say more about him. Okay. He is one of those intelligent guys who's measured and gets stuff done. USTR as an organization is very efficient, and they're just sequentially working through. And the 301s are an important part of the tools we have. 232s out of Commerce, those are primarily for the commodities, the steels, solar cells, it's critical minerals, copper, all of that, autos. What Jameson Greer has been doing is focusing on countries, but now he is expanding those 301 capabilities into some of these other measures. Got it. But it's good for the trading system ultimately because it's going to bring it back into balance. We can't run these large deficits for too long, Joe, without having significant issues that spill over into the bond market and the financial system.
You mentioned inflation. I've only got about 2 minutes left, and I know you're going to pull out the hammer when I ask you this question.
Yeah.
Look, we've seen some higher prices tied to tariffs that were, to your point, I think one-time changes as opposed to rolling inflation, but the war in Iran has made life difficult. with crude between 90 and 100 now. We've got gas at 410, and the market says the Fed's more likely to hike. I'll tell you what, though, a lot of Fed watchers say not going to happen with this new chair. Warsh, do you think that he would raise rates in this environment?
Politically, Kevin Warsh has a huge problem. Okay, 7 people make the decision on rates, right? Warsh is only one of them, even though he's the chair. You've got essentially 4 people on that board who are Bidenites, Powellites, and in my view, forgive me, not as bright as we need to have.
Do you think they'd hike rates now?
Here's the teaching point here. What history teaches us, Joe, so essential. You do not hike interest rates into the teeth of an energy price shock, full stop. That's a supply side shock, an energy price shock. Bernanke understood that. Greenspan understood that. And the reason why you don't do it is because a supply shock, like energy prices, it will help. It induces, in addition, it induces a recession. Okay, it does the work of a rate hike, so you don't need to double down.
Well, the bond market's doing work for them,
if you've got demand pull inflation, you want to rein the economy and slow things down, and everything's fine. But with the supply shock, you don't use rate hikes. So memo to Kevin Warsh, memo to the Fed, don't do that. And memo to the media, I would love to see more sophistication in understanding that point, because TV, print, whatever it is, oil prices go up, it's going to raise the probability of Fed rate hike. Don't do that.
Well, we're going to be watching rates together, and we're going to be watching these investigations. I hope you'll come back when this next one's done.
Always a pleasure.
Peter, thank you.
Good to see you, Joe.
Peter Navarro, live on Bloomberg. Coming up, the White House Correspondents' Dinner gets a redo. They're doing it again tonight. We'll look ahead to this event, cover it all with the day's news, with our political panel straight ahead, only on Balance of Power, on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for being with us following the Trump administration's decision to open a formal investigation into the EU's trade practices today. As we just discussed with Peter Navarro, I spoke with Ireland's ambassador to the United States, Geraldine Byrne-Nason, about what this means for the European Union. Listen.
Look, this is a challenging period for us internationally, but particularly economically, and no secret, Ireland, the European Union, doesn't think tariffs in general are a good idea. I just saw the latest news on tariffs as I arrived here to speak with you, Joe. Overnight, the administration had made an announcement around a 10% global tariff. And frankly, we in Europe welcomed that as good news.
Really?
That was positive. Last year, President Trump and President van der Leyen of the European Commission agreed an EU-US trade framework, and that set tariffs at a ceiling of 15%. So last night, when I saw the 10% announcement, I thought that was good news. The EU would be below the ceiling of 15% tariffs. We know it may not be the end of the story, but it was positively received. Just now, there has been an announcement that links tariffs with a fine or a series of fines that have been applied in terms of the European digital markets. And that changes the conversation. It's disappointing.
Indeed. It changes the conversation, and we're going to have it now with our political panel. Democratic strategist Jeannie Sheehan Zaino is with us, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Republican strategist Lester Munson is with us as well, principal at the International Practice at BGR Group. We've got a great panel. It's great to have you both. Thank you for being here. Lester, what a day for news here. The president drops the tariffs this morning. There's a sigh of relief across Europe, apparently, because they thought it might be worse. Now this. Will he rebuild the tariff wall? Peter Navarro sure seems to think so.
It doesn't seem like it. Or if he's going to build it, he's going to build it in a different way. This was, this was welcomed by a lot of folks because it could have been so much worse.
Yes.
So maybe the president is growing in office, Joe. This is
okay.
If this is good news, I'll take it on a Friday.
Well, forced labor practice is pretty tough allegation, Jeannie, particularly to the European Union. Do you think the EU will respond here with a more strict policy, a law that might convince the president to claw back?
I mean, what I would like to see from our own government is what the evidence is of this forced labor. I mean, we're talking about the EU. They've been extremely sensitive to this issue for many, many decades. Are they engaged in it? If they are, then absolutely, these tariffs are warranted. But I think what we have here is what was reported the minute at midnight these tariffs came down, which was that this was less about forced labor and more about Donald Trump wanting a workaround because the Supreme Court took away his much beloved tariff power, and this was a way to do it.
Really interesting analysis by Bloomberg Economics. Our colleagues were up late last night and found, based on their estimates, this will move up the average effective U.S. tariff rate from its current level by just 1/10 of 1 percentage point. When you factor in all the exemptions, Lester, whether it's foodstuffs, things we can't make or grow here, USMCA goods, is this just for show?
That'd be pretty shocking, wouldn't it, Joe? If things were just happening for show around here during this administration.
So that's a yes from Lester.
I think so. I think this. I'm reflecting on what Peter Navarro, your conversation with Peter Navarro, and I think the president very much wants to keep kind of trade hawks, the folks who want to have a robust tariff arrangement on his side. He wants to keep them as part of his coalition. He doesn't want to turn his back on them. He likes having Peter Navarro in the White House. I totally get the politics of that. That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of what helped him put together a winning coalition. So he's got to kind of deliver a little bit of meat for the grist here, for the grist for the mill. I think is the right metaphor. So I think this is part of that. It kind of sets the predicate for him to do more if he wants to. They're recovering from the Supreme Court decision, so he wants to maintain flexibility. This gives him the chance to ratchet it up if he feels he needs to. But he doesn't want anyone to think he's ignoring this issue.
Does this play into the midterms, Jeannie? If candidates can tie higher prices to it, it's already a story involving the war in Iran, right? High oil prices, high gas and diesel. These are issues that Democrats are going to be talking about. I didn't think tariffs would end up being a big midterm issue following the Supreme Court case, but maybe you'll tell me otherwise. Things are changing.
Absolutely. He was sort of saved by the Supreme Court, and then he jumped right back into it. And that's why politically this doesn't make a lot of sense. We have a Harris poll, 72% of Americans blame Trump tariffs for the economic conditions, in addition to the aforementioned war. So if the amount of money that we are going to get as a result of this is as small as you just indicated, politically, what is the benefit here and what is the goal of this? In my mind, you're going to tariff 80 countries, some of our closest allies in the world. There should be a huge reason for doing this. I'm in favor of using tariffs, but you should use them for a reason, not just use them to keep people in the White House that are tariff hawks. That's not in the benefit of the United States in my mind.
As we spend time with Jeannie and Lester, we have breaking news. The Associated Press is now reporting that the United States has fired on a merchant vessel that tried to breach the blockade. This is in the Strait of Hormuz, of course. The AP citing a CENTCOM spokesperson on this U.S. military action. We have fired on a vessel that tried to make a run for it. And this reminds us of the backdrop here, guys, when it comes to the war in Iran. The president saying in an interview with Axios, I'm considering a massive attack, bigger than ever before. We're all set for it. Is this the hook to launch such an attack?
Could be. The president's real asset here is the blockade. He's got to implement that in a tough manner. It's got to be very credible. And if he wants to kind of use the threat of this extra military action, maybe this is the predicate for that. We'll see. He wants to maintain maximum flexibility here, so he's going to look for a predicate. And I think the real question for me is less about this, how he's going to maneuver this weekend, and the longer issue, which is the more important issue, is how long can he maintain this blockade? Yes. How long can the U.S. Navy carry out this mission? That's what's really going to put pressure on the Iranians at the end of the day.
We've got a lot of people and a lot of material over there, Jeannie. I don't know what would prompt a merchant vessel to try to gun for it here to make the cannonball run in the Strait of Hormuz, but this is one thing that the president promised would happen. Are you concerned about the massive attack, or is this empty talk?
I'm concerned about it. You know, I was listening to your very good conversation with the representative earlier in the show, and he said something that everybody who has seen the intel on this has repeated over and over again, which is that there is not a military solution to this. Our goals seem to be at this point to reopen the strait and then down the line to get some kind of nuclear agreement. How in the world is this going to result in that? That's the question. And as we've seen since February 28th, the administration doesn't seem to have a strategy to get us to point A and point B. So these threats, empty or not, are very concerning.
Well, boy, the president's got a lot on his mind as he makes his way to the Waldorf Astoria here in Washington, D.C. That will be the site for the White House Correspondents' Dinner 2.0. 90 days, 90 nights after the first attempt was broken up, as you remember, by this attempted shooter. We were all crammed in there in the Hilton ballroom, and the president promised there would be a redo. Well, it's going to happen in a much smaller ballroom, but we're told the same speech. Lester, is he going to give it to us tonight? What are we in for?
Joe, my invitation must have gotten lost in the mail somewhere.
I think mine must have been with you.
So I don't know what his message is. I do think it's, in the grand scheme of things, good that he's talking to the press. This is a president who loves talking to you guys. Yeah, right. He loves talking to the news media. He loves being in the news. There's this kind of pretend hostile relationship for a while that sometimes doesn't seem like he's pretending. But I think this is a guy who loves being in the spotlight. He wanted to recreate the dinner after the kind of tragedy of last time. So this is a good thing, and I'm glad the president is engaging.
Are you embracing this to the extent that Lester is, Jeannie? The mentalist is going to be there, for crying out loud. They're trying to put a show together here.
That's right. Remember, Joe, in April after the shooting, the president talked about how unifying and unified people were in the aftermath. And within 24 hours, he attacked Norah O'Donnell from CBS pretty viciously and called the press terrible people. We are, Joe, today is the 1-year anniversary since they cut funding for NPR and PBS. 24 hours since the judge forced the DOJ to remove the subpoenas on the press from the New York Times for reporting on a Qatari jet that was gifted to the president. And Tyler Pager, one of those reporters, is being honored, including the Wall Street Journal being honored for a story on Epstein and Trump.
That's right.
So, Joe, what do you bet the president wants to shake their hands? You're celebrating the First Amendment with an administration that does not. I don't know that it's such a good thing.
I'm popping my corn. All I know is you need a barcode, a QR code, and a photo ID this time, so they changed it. Jeannie Shanzano and Lester Munson. I guess we'll all watch it on TV this time. Thank you for being with us, and have a great weekend. We'll be back with Kaylee next week right here on Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.